Hey everyone, I'm Phil Albertelli and this is The Week in Doubt. Yesterday I released a Patreon bonus episode, which I made available to the public if you want to check it out. It's basically just a longer unscripted version of what you're about to hear. My response to some clips from Jordan Peterson's recent appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored. As I explained in that Patreon episode, one of my pet peeves concerning Peterson is the way he tends to blur the line between the figurative and the literal, and his hesitancy to give a clear answer regarding whether or not he actually believes in God. And I don't mean God as the metaphorical embodiment of our highest ideals. By God, I mean a supernatural creator God. And on a related note, I've often also wondered whether or not he actually believes in an afterlife. And at one point in the interview, Piers Morgan, who is friends with Peterson, asks him, albeit in a gentle, polite way, whether he believes in heaven. And for context, Jordan Peterson recently lost both his mother and father within about a 5-month span, I believe. And as I said in that bonus episode, I know how that feels, and as much as he vexes me at times, my heart goes out to him on that count. But here's the first clip.
Obviously, you've just written a whole book about the Bible, about God, about all of this. When I finished it, I couldn't work out whether you actually believe in God, whether you think there is, personally think there is, for example, a heaven. You've obviously had to give this, through the death of your parents, a lot of thought, I would imagine. What is the reality? I mean, do you believe do you believe in God? Do you think there is a heaven? Is that where you think they've gone to?
You know, Piers, I would say that I leave the things that are beyond my comprehension outside the realm of my comprehension, and I try to understand what I can understand. I certainly believe that we can produce hell on earth, and we have. In many ways, I've certainly had experiences that indicated to me that the reestablishment of the Garden of Eden on earth is a possibility, and that you can live like that. How those things are related to what's eternal is beyond me. I think like it's beyond everyone. And I believe that with sufficient faith that you walk with God through the valley of the shadow of death. I think that's true. I think that if you're courageous and you confront the worst life has to offer, that the spirit of your ancestors walks with you. What that means in the final analysis with regards to the relationship between the finite and the eternal, I don't know.
Firstly, I find it kind of telling that even Piers, who's friends with and admires Peterson, follows his work, and just finished reading an entire book of his which focuses on the Bible, is still left feeling confused and having to ask whether or not Jordan actually even believes in God. I find Peterson's answer to be somewhat evasive, but to his credit, perhaps not as much so as usual. He basically admits he doesn't know if there's an afterlife or a heaven, which in fairness, none of us do, describing it, and I'm paraphrasing, as being outside the realm of his comprehension. But then he goes on to employ language like walking with God or with the spirits of your ancestors, and it's hard to tell how figurative or literal he's being.
Christianity Today reviewed your book and said, Christian readers should learn from Peterson's boldness, his disposition of awe, and docility before the sacred page. However, the question of God is unavoidable. Peterson is slippery on this point. Familiar words from Christian doctrine like creation and redemption and resurrection mean something altogether different when Peterson uses them. They're kind of suggesting that you go right to the point of saying you believe in God and that you're a fully paid up God believer, if you like, for want of a better phrase, but you don't quite cross that line. Is that where you are? I mean, if you say you've had a sort of...
Well, no, I don't think so. I think the first thing I would say is that no, there's a continual insistence in the biblical text that God is outside of understanding, outside of our understanding, right? So whatever God is beyond the categories, even of real and unreal. And that's not my interpretation of the text. I mean, even Moses only gets a glimpse of God's back. And so we have to always remember that we're talking about something that in the final analysis we don't understand. But then I would also say, I don't believe that belief means what most people think when they say belief. For me, religious belief isn't propositional, it's existential. And we talked about the great adventure, let's say, that Trump and his weird team of X-Men and Avengers are embarking upon. And I would say their faith is manifest in the pattern of their action and not in what they say. And I think that religious faith in the most fundamental sense is the willingness to hoist your cross joyfully as you trudge uphill. And that's not the same thing as declaiming about what you assume propositionally to be true. And Christ in the Gospels says, not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like belief is a very complicated issue. And I think the best way that you infer your knowledge about someone's belief is watching how they conduct themselves.
I found that so cathartic that even this Christian publication acknowledges that Peterson is quote-unquote slippery when it comes to stating whether or not he actually believes in God, and that when he uses words like redemption and resurrection, it seems like he's not quite using them the same way that, well, an actual believing Christian would. In his response, Peterson waxes philosophical about how quote-unquote God is so mysterious he even defies the categories of real or unreal, which to me still sounds somewhat slippery. I think mysterious is a fair adjective for a higher power, but don't most people still have some idea whether or not they actually believe in one? And another thing I cover in the bonus episode is this idea of Peterson's that people display what they believe more through their actions than their words. And I think that's actually true at times, but I don't think it's necessarily a good way of accurately telling whether or not someone believes in God. It reminds me of the annoying way Peterson would try to play gotcha with certain atheists. If an atheist like Matt Dillahunty would say, "I don't believe in God," Peterson would reply smugly, "But you behave like you do, or you act like you do." I think that belief in God can motivate people to do good, like volunteering or giving to charity, or the example I used in the Patreon bonus episode was rushing in front of a car to save a child. But in my view, we're members of a social species, evolved with a capacity, yes, for tribalism and violence, but also for things like empathy, altruism, and group cooperation. And so if someone does something altruistic, it doesn't necessarily mean they believe in a supernatural creator. I'm an agnostic atheist, and I think I know better than Jordan Peterson what I actually believe. There's many non-believers like myself who had religious upbringings and found losing their faith to be a very harrowing experience or process. But I guess according to Jordan Peterson, that's not possible, and we never really stop believing. Very condescending.
Truth is unified. And what that's going to mean eventually is that the world of value and the world of fact coincide in some manner that we don't yet understand.
You've analogized the dragon fight to
Well, how many
fighting
dragons have
Satan.
you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality. I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes, you mentioned. I've heard that comment.
It was really interesting. I've interviewed Richard Dawkins several times, and I always say to him, it's interesting. I said, because you cannot explain to me, Richard Dawkins, for example, what was there before nothing? What was there before nothing? Because the human brain can't comprehend what that even means, there has to be a superior power to a human being out there somewhere that can make sense of all that. And that's why, look, I believe in God. I was raised as a Catholic. But the Catholic Herald said of your debate there was no meeting of minds. They were forced to agree their minds were differently constructed. There was no merging of reality. And it seems to me probably if you have me, you, and Dawkins in the same room, you've got the three components there. You've got one person, me, who's an absolute unequivocal believer. You've got you that I suspect is nudging that way, but it's not quite there. in the way that I am, and you've got Dawkins, who's completely implacably opposed to any sense that they could possibly be anything other than what's staring him in front of his eyes. Would that be fair?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. The first is that even the scientific accounts for materialist reality require one miracle to get going.
So there, both Piers and Jordan Peterson sound like they're channeling Stephen C. Meyer. One free miracle to get the whole thing going, there must be a divine intelligence behind it all, etc. And I agree with Piers that there's still so much we don't know about the origins of the universe and how all of this came about, so much that for now is beyond our human comprehension. But that doesn't necessarily mean God done did it, that it's the work of some supernatural creator or divine intelligence. That is one possibility, I suppose, and it might surprise some, but I hope it's true. I'd like to believe there's some divine purpose or plan behind it all. But sadly, I'm skeptical. It could be that there's a naturalistic explanation, but once again, currently we're incapable of wrapping our monkey minds around it. And at the beginning of the clip, you briefly see Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson arguing about dragons. That was really weird, and it's something I wanted to cover on the show but didn't get around to it. Alex O'Connor moderated a debate between the two, and near the end they literally got into a heated debate over whether or not dragons are real. Peterson brought up this idea that I've heard before, and in fairness that I think has merit, that the dragon as a symbol is a kind of amalgam or composite figure, embodying traits of various predatory animals, such as snakes and large cats, etc., and blurring the line between the figurative and the literal as usual. He tried to argue that since the dragon represents actual predatory animals, or since we face real obstacles in our lives that we refer to as quote-unquote dragons, that dragons are real. And that dragons are as real as lions. And Alex O'Connor had to actually ask if he believed dragons were biologically real. And Peterson was kind of evasive. It was wild. I too love religious and mythic symbolism, but why insist on making things difficult by blurring the line between the metaphorical and the factual? Can't you just say that the dragon is an age-old powerful symbol that embodies aspects of various predators? Why do you have to dance around when someone asks you point blank if they're a biological reality? Strange. The whole thing was strange. But that's it for now. As always, thank you everyone for listening or watching. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/theweekindoubt and help support what I do here for as little as 99 cents a month. All right, brothers and sisters, until next time.